pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is public to be heard, and we have no one that has signed up. So we will move on to, I need a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Motion made by Mrs. Lunbay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Murphy. Is there any discussion? Seeing none?
Ms. Bennett, could you list the reason just for, since we're for going into
Sure.
executive session?
We are going into executive session with our search consultant, Mr. Kevin McDonald, and in doing so, we'll be discussing the employment of particular individuals. We will call the vote.
Mrs. Lembeck? Yes. Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Roll?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mr. Roll?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear. I apologize. And Mrs. Lembeck?
Yes.
And Mr. Regal will not be here for the session.
Yes. next item on the agenda is presentations / discussion. First is financial summary report. Mr. Scott Rosansky, please.
Okay, you have two financial reports in your packet, the May financial clerk's report in June. I'm just going to focus in on June because a lot of the items repeat from the differences that have been going on through the year. You'll find that on page 90, but if you want to look at May, that's page 81. Overall, I've highlighted pretty much everything on this report because I wanted to highlight the changes. We do have some new board members, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about a few things. Real property tax items went up $254,000. That's our payments of those taxes. That's when businesses come in to the district, and Genesee County Economic Development Corp gives them a 10-year tax phase-in. Usually the first 2 years is 0% of the assessed value, and then 20%, and then 40%, every 2 years. Usually that's how it works. And so those are billings that the district does directly to those businesses, and they don't, after 10 years, they go on the tax roll, and they eventually help the assessed value at that point in time. But for the first 10 years, they're a revenue source to the district. It's up $254,000. Our projection when we did the budget a year ago was $248,000, based on the schedule and what we estimated the tax rate to be. So it's very close and within range. Next item is the non-property tax items, and this is our utility tax, and this dates back to the 1960s, and when the public voted to have utility tax instead of sharing in sales tax. So this increase over last June, 34,000 or 5.28%. Been tracking this for 16 years, and this is the fourth lowest that we've received on an annual basis. But interestingly enough, the 5-year average is 688, so we're right at 686,000. So things have kind of settled the last 5 years. So we were concerned about making the budget at 675, and looks like that's going to be a pretty stable number moving forward. There was in 2008-9, Verizon got audited by New York State, and we received a $600,000 one-time revenue back then. And that's why utilities, let's say the Tavia City School District tax, if you have Verizon, you'll probably see that on there. I kept getting calls like before we got that, why is this tax on my cell phone bill? So until I got the money from the state, I didn't know why. Then I knew why. So overall, like a 10-year average, it was 712,000. So, and again, we're closer to the 5-year average. Use of money in property, general fund, that went down about 91,000 compared to last year, and that is interest rates have tanked. Plus, we lost most of our leases for Robert Morris, so that was most of that decrease there. And then use of money, again, highlight for reserves, and again, that would just be the interest rate. So the money we have set aside in reserves, it's not earning as much as it had been in the past. Miscellaneous, next line item that I've highlighted, an increase of 281,000, or about 61.5%. We received some additional E-rate funding from the state, and the government actually that passes it on. We did a special project to upgrade our access points, wireless access points. That was about $97,000. And then last year's BOCES refund was about $139,000 more than previous. It was an increase of $139,000. And when BOCES closes out their books at the end of the year, their fund balance has to come out to zero. So what they do is refund anything that's over, that they collected over and above type thing. So, and it was from a previous year of 1920, the refund, and if you recall, COVID hit in March of 20, so, you know, they had reduced some of their expenses, and we pay on a monthly basis when we commit to BOCES, and so we were technically overpaying, but then we get it back in the following year. Next, state aid, state and federal aid, increase of $2.3 million, or 8.82%. This was a welcome surprise for the district and most districts this last year. If you recall, about a little over a year ago, New York State was projecting a 20% withhold of state aid, which they did do initially in the summer of last year. And so when the budget was being prepared, Governor Cuomo in March of 2020 had talked about reducing state aid, withholding state aid. The board adopted a budget that was very conservative, figuring that you know, we didn't want to put ourselves in a bad situation. Obviously, a year later, federal government stepped up and bailed out districts in essence, and so we see a big surplus here, a one-time surplus, totally unexpected. And then the last item I'd like to highlight on the revenue side is this debt service. And when we borrow money, and we were borrowing money short-term for the 2020 Vision Capital Project, we're not quite done with that. We have phase 2 coming up this next year, within this next year. But so we've been on short-term borrowing, and that's a bond anticipation note. We put those out to bid, and when the bidders bid on our borrowing, sometimes they give money to the district as a bond, as a premium. And so what that does is it lowers the net interest rate. So instead of bidding 0.50, they're bidding 1.5% on the interest, but they give us $100,000 or $200,000. So our fiscal advisor takes and recalculates what that net interest cost is, and to determine who the lowest is. So they prepaid us money, and we have that to pay them back a year from now. So we did have that in December of 2019, and then that bond anticipation note matured, and then in June of 2021, we did another bond anticipation note, and that's the net surplus of the prepayment of their interest expense, basically. So overall, revenues increased $2.9 million, or 6.21% compared to what the previous year was. And then on the expense side, I'll start with the bottom number first. This is the expenses over the course of the year only went up $173,000, or 0.37%. So we're pretty flat in terms of our expenditures. And obviously a couple things I've highlighted here, and I'll talk a little bit about some other district-wide things like central services. This is mostly our COVID expenses. We had a lot of expenses in June last year, but those purchase orders are still outstanding. So those are encumbrances, and they carry the money over into the next year. So it carried money into 2021, and then when we paid it, it hits the expense. So we have excess purchasing that went on in central services that kind of skewed, you know, the expense for a cash flow basis, right? Expense this year versus expense last year. So, and again, we were trying to prepare for COVID, so we're buying face masks, all the cleaning, supplies, temperature checkers, and things like that. So a lot of expenses that went in and put us in a good position for this 2021 school year. Overall, payroll expenditures in all the various accounts, and most of them are going to be in these 4 accounts, the teaching, special schools, and pupil services, the 3 accounts. Our payroll expenditures decreased by $1.4 million compared to last year, for just under 6%. So again, those board members who were on the board a little over a year ago, we were looking, our first draft of the budget, we were about $2 million short. And so with what was going on at the state level, or nationally, and decisions were made, positions were reduced. We really were at reducing 33 positions, but in the end it came out to about 24. There were a lot of positions by attrition, so positions might have been lost, but not all 33 positions affected people directly. And then we hired some of those positions back. So in the end, that 33 became 24. And obviously we accounted for it in the budget process, but and then as we were going through the year, when a vacancy occurred, we didn't replace. We tried to again absorb it, again not knowing there's going to be a federal bailout type thing. So we're down in payroll $1.4 million compared to last year. And then our BOCES expenditures compared to last year, we're down $426,000, or about 7%. And again, we made decisions to reduce our BOCES expenditures. Doesn't directly affect, those cuts would affect BOCES per se, and eventually it would affect the district in refunds of BOCES expense, or state aid from BOCES, which are revenue line items. But in order to minimize the impact on the district and our employees, BOCES services were reduced. That's pretty much the teaching, special schools, and pupil services. Also with pupil services, you'll see $567,000. One of the Federal CARES Act, one of the bailouts we got last year during the budget process was about $800,000 in the Federal CARES Act. We use that in this payroll section pretty much for our school counselors, that we assign that funding for our school counselors. So it's not part of the general fund budget per se. It's operating as like a grant type thing. So instructional media, that's our technology purchases, and again with BOCES that was down about $537,000. So those are when we say we cut BOCES expenses, most of it was technology expenditures. The area of transportation, it does show an 18.5% increase, or $221,000. Pretty much for the 3/4 of the year this year, we were operating under a hybrid model. We needed a little bit more buses than because we had less students on a bus. And then last year in 1920, we had a full year for through mid-March, and then no expenses from mid-March to June. So things got a little skewed with both years. And then also this year, there was an agreement that the board approved in July regarding contractor standby costs, and those expenses were incurred in this year too. So that kind of inflated that a little bit. All those are state aid. We receive state aid on it, but that helped, like I said, inflate the differences. When we go back to 21-22, if we're back to normal, this number will probably be closer to the budget. So you'll see as we go forward into this year that number is going to be even higher than this year's number. But we hope to be operating under full capacity. Employee benefits, a decrease of $500,000 or 5.49%. This is our staffing is decreased, we pay less in employee benefits. Just area healthcare, health insurance was a 2% increase, so we're down 5.5%, even factoring in the 2% health insurance increase. The reserve for unemployment, previous months this was showing some expense, I think about $35,000. Again, with the federal bailout, they reimbursed us, so no expense. And so that's why we changed from April, even May, to now we show the money coming in, and so that netted out that expense to nothing. Technically, though, we did get, I think, about $65,000, and so the other, we'll say $30,000 was last year's unemployment, so that went into revenue. And debt service, this is on the expense side. Similar to your mortgage, it's our capital project and our financing of the capital project. So it's when we pay our principal and interest on our capital projects. We just did that $26.7 million capital project. We couldn't pay cash for the whole thing, so we have to finance it. So we're paying, about $1 million, whatever it is, $1.5 million in principal and interest on each bond and such. But we had debt falling off this year, and so that's why you see the decrease in expense of $894. That does also affect the revenue in terms of state aid. When we have less, we get aided on our expenses for debt service. So then if we have less debt service, then we also adjust the state aid down too. And then interfund transfers, and this you'll see a big increase of $536,000. And this is really just an accounting entry. It's approximately $571,000 of the Jackson playground and the restroom improvements that we did. We had the money sitting in the reserve, but the funding has to show on the expense side, so of the general fund budget. So it kind of gets inflated when it's presented this way, but the money was already set aside in the reserve, and it wasn't part of the general fund budget per se. So that's a summary of the operations from 2021 during probably September. The audit committee will get the draft report of the independent audit, and then that'll come to the board for a full approval in October. And Freed Maxick will be here to present it to the full board, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No, we're all set.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the superintendent's update. Mr. Scott Bishoping.
So right now I'm passing down a copy of a message that we we're going to share with the parents via our social media and website tomorrow. And it's just an update and trying to feed out information in bits and pieces rather than one big plan that comes out, simply because we don't know all the information yet. So we did it in a Q&A form. You can kind of see the different pieces. One is to ensure that people know that we're returning in person 5 days a week, much like we finished last year. Secondly, where we are with masks. We want to make sure that parents know that on buses, for certain, we're going to have to wear masks. That's a law. And then that we will, based on our anticipated position regarding numbers of cases, be following the stand-up, mask-up kind of piece that we have all along. Most districts have done that all along. And then, but finally, we'll be holding off to find out about the masking while students are seated in the classroom. We expect that with the new governor taking over, there may be information there. We also will get more information over the course of the next couple of weeks about the level of transmission that goes on, that's gone on in the community to help inform that decision. Right now, I'm working with other Genesee County superintendents, along with the health director, if it stays that we have that decision-making locally, to make sure that we have the most informed decision possible. I've talked to several people on both sides of whether or not students should wear masks. I've assured them that I'm not a health expert, right? And that I've used the analogy of a snow day. When it's bad weather, I call the highway department, and they tell me whether the roads are in good enough condition for us to travel. I don't make that decision unilaterally. And the same way in decision-making about mask wearing, it should be should be with the guidance of health experts. And we certainly have to take that into account because that's not the expertise of school personnel. We know the education part. We need to rely on the health experts, whether that's our our county health director, our own medical director, or others to provide that information. We're working on that collectively with other superintendents to see if we can have some common elements among the districts in the region, so that there's not a lot of differences, or there may be some differences, but it's not extreme between our expectations. As far as fall sports, we expect those to start on Monday, and Mr. Bromley is putting in the pieces that need to be. Since most of those are outdoors, it's great. It lessens the mask requirements, but in locker rooms or for volleyball, gymnastics, those sports that are indoors, there will be some expectations of mask wearing because athletes can't stay 3 feet apart from each other. And so in those cases, we for sure will need to have to do mask wearing. As far as just a reminder about the expectations around symptoms, if your child has any of those symptoms, they can't be in school, not to send them, or if they develop those symptoms, that we'll be needing to send them home because of that. And then will there be remote learning, and we do have an option for that, and asking parents to let us know by next Thursday if they want to go that route. So those are the components now. We'll have more information and we'll send more out. The parents I've talked to, as far as when will we know about mask wearing, and I have said to them that the level of mask wearing may change regularly throughout the school year as cases wax and wane within the community. So I wouldn't want to project that there's going to be a plan around mask wearing. That here we want to put together, here's how we're going to determine what level of mask wearing there should be at a particular time. And that should encompass, if it's not taken out of our hands, it should encompass how cases are in the community and how cases are in the school district. And if we can come up with some criteria around that, then we can know it may start one way, may change as cases increase, decrease, and we can let kids know on a weekly basis, or parents know on a weekly basis, what those expectations are. Also, we need to make sure that our teachers are aware, or continue to be aware. They do know and have acknowledged, but it's September, and September can be 45 or it can be 85, right? And so on those days that are 85, making sure we acknowledge the need for students, if they are required to wear masks, mask breaks, appropriate amount of time, making sure that our kids aren't melting, for lack of a better term. That it's sometimes difficult even without masks, but we want to make sure that we have extra care around that and provide the time that kids need to be as healthy as can be. Any questions for you around that?
I just have one with the remote learning. Are we still just kind of gathering feedback on how many will be interested in remote learning, or have we decided we are going to offer them?
We are going to offer remote learning for the year. What was decided in talking to the leadership team was that for those kids and families who have a need, whether it's because of health reasons for the student or at home, to have the child learn remotely, that we were going to have that as an offering. For 6 through 12, BOCES has a program, and so we'll take advantage of that program and tuition our kids into that. For K through 5, we're assessing how many kids there are, if we have other schools we can combine with, or if we have our own program where we might have one teacher with a multi-age program doing that remotely. We're assessing that with the information that's coming in. Our parents making that choice.
I see here we have the link for them to go on to with their intent. Are they going to have the option to, if we say, okay, Dave is going to say they have to wear masks, so I'm going to keep my child home and do remote learning, but 6 months from now, Tavia says we're not going to wear masks, so the family will have to commit for one option or the other.
Yeah, they'll have to commit, if they want to commit to remote learning, they really need to commit to that for the year.
Okay.
Only because the issue of students being, having some outside, some inside, really creates a very difficult learning environment for teachers as well as for students. And we want to make sure that we honor parents' needs, but it's especially centered around the need for health reasons. And so we've had a couple parents ask, how do we, decide, do we want to do this or not? And my comments have really been, this is for health reasons, not for what's your choice, but you really may not have a choice, right? Your child may have some compromised health condition, or somebody at home does, and you don't want to put them in the position of that. That's why we're doing this. Will some people take advantage of it for other reasons? Certainly, but we're not going to accommodate those other reasons. We're going to accommodate the reason for the health purpose.
Just know last year was challenging for our staff to know 1 week or the next on how many students they were going to have in person or bouncing onto the remote.
We still will need to do that because we're going to have kids who are quarantined. Teachers are going to be in that mode. What we want to do is pull off that layer of here's the kid who's going to be out all year long, and we have to incorporate their instruction remotely, just to pull that layer off, because it still will be difficult. As Nick knows, who's here, he's going to probably have kids who will get quarantined at periods of time, and there will be the obligation to how to provide instruction during that quarantine period.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just so you know too, John, the letter about options for remote learning went out last week.
Correct.
So this is just a reminder of that, just to make sure. Good.
Are we still imposing temperature checks?
No. What we'll be pushing out to parents is that when they send their child to school, they're acknowledging that they don't have any of these symptoms. If a child develops, because it happens, right? If they come down with it during the day, we'll still follow the guidelines of isolating them, sending them home if they're ill. That's not necessarily new. I mean, we've been doing that for years. I think we've sometimes said, try a cough drop and maybe you can stick around in the past. That can't happen in this environment. That will stay the same, but the attestation and the temperature checks we won't be doing on a daily basis. Now, I'm saying that for now, right? We don't know what will happen in October or November or December, but at this point, we're not expecting that.
So as of right now, we are not mandated to have masks on. Is there a mandate saying that if a child's in school, he has to have a mask on?
There's no state mandate for that right now.
There's no state mandate. The Department of Health hasn't come out yet and said anything. Genesee County, have they mandated anything to us as of yet?
They've not mandated anything. They've suggested we follow CDC guidelines. That's been the most recent guidance. And so, like I said, we're taking all of those things into account, including, so, I mean, the priority number one is health and safety of our students and staff. The second priority is how do we keep students in school and provide them the best possible education. One of the mitigating strategies to quarantine is if we have kids that are masked, if both the kid who has the virus and those around them that are masked, then those around them that are masked don't need to be quarantined. That keeps kids in school. And so there are health and instructional reasons for us to look at masking. What we want to know is what's the right level of virus to indicate that. The CDC has indicated that would be at a high level within the community. What we want to make sure of and what we want to look at is, if we have the opportunity to, is how does that match with the level of virus within the school? Because sometimes virus can be in our centers, whether that's senior center, it can be in those areas and not more so in the general public. But we want to keep abreast of that and make decisions accordingly.
So as of right now, child comes to school, they have to wear their mask while they're in school, or while they're walking the hallways. When they get to the classroom, it's CDC, they can remove their mask.
That's not been decided yet. We won't decide that, so we have some time yet to decide that. There's no reason to decide that now, because we're still 3 weeks away from the start of school. And we were talking to Brian Quinn from the Daily News earlier. I said, I look at it as, where were we 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, we had a handful of cases in the community. 3 weeks later, we're at red. Where will we be 3 weeks from now? And I can't predict that. So the best thing to do is to make sure we're saying to parents, like this says, your child's going to have a mask. We'll be able to, closer to the situation, again, unless it's taken out of our hands by a state mandate. If it's in our hands, we'll be able to be more adept at what's happening at that period of time, what's the best mode.
So we're going to mandate the kids are going to have masks. That's basically what we're saying. Because I understand we're 3 weeks away,
Yeah.
but we have a lot of people out in the community that aren't happy with the mask mandate. And I think we've all heard it. I'm not saying I'm for it, I'm not saying I'm against it, but they want to know what's going on. And they don't want to wait 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I've had those, I'm sorry, Bill.
Because they're going to want to, I mean, they may, like John was saying, they might want to say, hey, well, now I'm going to go remote.
Yeah.
Okay? But they need to know that by next week, because you're saying that has to be, we want that turned in as soon as possible. We can let these guys know. I don't think we have, why can't we be like some of the other districts in the area and say, okay, this is what we're going to do now. But that may change. We may say, okay, Kathy Hope has come out and said 3 different things that she's been said that she's going to become the new governor. Okay? We're probably going to get mandated saying we're going to have masks, and that's going to be out of our hands at that point in time. But right now, we're not being mandated to do anything. Why can't we come out and say, okay, at this time, right now, as of right now, when your child comes to school, when they walk on the halls, they have to have a mask on. When they sit down, they don't. 2 weeks from now, that may change.
Yeah, but simply because right now they're not coming to school, and I've had calls with that question, and like I said, my response is that we aren't doing the virtual school to accommodate that sort of thing. We're doing the virtual or remote option to accommodate health issues, and if a parent wants to, that could be the case. But I could say right now that a child wouldn't have to wear a mask, but by 3rd week in September they would. At that point, is that parent going to then want to take their child remote? I could tell that parent there may be a point in this school year in which your child has to wear a mask all day. There's probably a good chance of that, given what we've seen in other states and that sort of thing. So they need to make a decision. I would suggest they make a decision along those lines rather than us being forced to say on August 19th, what we're gonna have is on September 1st, or September 7th. That's a long ways away, John, and I appreciate that parents want to know, but I think sometimes it's more they want to know so that they can argue against it, rather than they want to know because they have some plans to make. If you need to make plans about your child, I would tell them, and I have told them, that you probably need to plan like they're gonna have to wear a mask at some point. That would be my guess.
So if you're planning on being remote, you're giving it the whole year, you're signing up for the whole year. Are those who are in school choosing to go in person at any point in time able to opt into the virtual? Because like John said, okay, let's say we start out without masks, whatever, and then we have to go to them. Those people who don't wish to have their children wear masks, are they going to be allowed to opt into the virtual?
If we have circumstances, like certainly there may be a child or a family that discovers a health reason during the course of the school year. And so we would do that, but at that point in time, if we can do that with BOCES or however, we would expect that they would stay in that for the remainder of the year, that they wouldn't bounce back.
Right, but people would have the option to say, okay, my child was in person, but I would like to take him, to give him or her to virtual.
Yeah, like I said, given we don't know what parameters BOCES might have, like they probably have a certain limitation, and we would have to check with them to see before we broad brush, say anybody who wants to. My guess is there may be a point where who knows, we could be have to go remote at some point in time. We never know at the start of these things what that's going to look like. So it's pretty hard to forecast right now. We want to be prepared for those options, but sometimes putting that out there means that part of your plan. And it's not necessarily part of our plan. Our plan is to adjust our mask wearing to what's prevalent in the community at the time. And I think that's what I want to make sure is out there. As soon as I say, here's what is going to happen, then people say, that's what's going to be all the time. So if we have to make a change, then there's concern, like, why are you changing this? What happened to make you change that? And I want to make sure that we can put that out there and make sure that the understanding is we're doing that based on what's going on now and what our recommendations are from our health directors and others.
So why couldn't we say, all right, parents, we're gonna leave the option, as of today, as of tonight when we walk out here, the option's yours. Tomorrow, that option may change. If we see a spike, if something happens health-wise, if somebody comes out and says, okay, we're mandating. Why can't we do that? You just said we're gonna follow everything by what comes back, what the health director says, what maybe the governor says, or the New York State Health Department says. So why can't we say, parents, we're gonna leave it up to you. If you wanna mask your kid, mask your kid. If you don't wanna mask your kid, don't mask your kid. Why can't we say that to them now? And in 2 weeks, if something changes, we got us played. There's nothing we can do, and they mandate it, and that's what it is.
From my standpoint, I don't know what the value of that is. I don't know what the value of saying, here's what we're gonna do now, because students aren't coming to school now. They have guidelines for athletics. We don't have kids coming to school now, so I don't get the value of that. Just to have, we as a parent, I know by this letter, my child's gonna have to bring a mask to school every day. They're gonna have to wear it at some point because of where we are right now and what we anticipate will be the case. And then we'll find out as we get closer what the level of that mask wearing is. That's what I could tell them. Because you know what, when we're in September, in the middle of September, I would tell them the same thing. Hey, we're gonna know for the beginning of October. When we get closer to the end of September, we'll know what we have to do then. At that point in time, and I want to make sure that it's on. Again, if it's not taken out of our hands, it could very well be. This discussion could be moot, right? But we would want to let them know at that point in time.
Anything else? Thank you very much, Mr. Fisher. Next item on the agenda is agenda alterations, and we have several. You have it under your green piece of paper. That will be coming under BCSD reports and appointments. Excuse me. I need a motion to accept the agenda alterations as listed.
So,
Motion made by Mrs. Bowman. Is there a second?
second.
Second by Mrs. Hughes. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mrs. Lundey?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Mr. Riegel?
Yes.
Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict?
Yes. Next item on the agenda is consent items. I need a motion to accept consent items as altered and as listed. Motion made by Mrs. Hughes. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Lenday. Is there any discussion?
I do. I'd like to table J1.
Okay, I need a motion to accept that we'll table item J1 and take it out of consent.
So moved.
Motion made by Mrs. Bowman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Wolf. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we call a vote for the table.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mrs. Lundey?
Yes.
Mr. Riegel?
Yes.
Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict?
Yes. Now I need to call the vote for consent items.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mrs. Lundey?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Mr. Riegel?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict?
Yes. The next item is old business. Board of Ed committees, Mr. Marucci wants to be removed from the safety committee. I need a motion to accept this change.
So
Motion made by Mr. Riegel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bowman. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, you can call the vote.
Mr. Riegel?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mrs. Lundey?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict?
Yes, he's being added to the Buildings and Grounds Committee. Next item is under new business. Updated Teacher Mentoring Program Handbook 2021. I need a motion to accept the updated Teacher Mentoring Program Handbook.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Riegel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bowman. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, you can call the vote.
Mr. Riegel?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mrs. Lundey?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict?
Yes. Next item is Batavia City School District Emergency Response Plan 2122. I need a motion to accept this emergency response plan.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Riegel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Marucci. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, you can call the vote.
Mr. Riegel?
Yes.
Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mrs. Lundey?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict?
Yes. Last, under new business, is memorandum of understanding between Batavia Community Schools, which is the Batavia City School District, and Genesee County Retired Senior Volunteer Program. I need a motion to approve this memorandum.
So moved.
Motion made by Mrs. Bowman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Lundey. Is there any discussion? Seeing
Hughes?
none.
It was Hughes.
Mrs. Hughes, I'm sorry.
Got it.
Any discussion? Seeing none, you can call the vote.
Mrs. Bowman?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mrs. Lundey?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Mr. Riegel?
Yes.
Mr. Marucci?
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict?
Yes. That is all for the general business, and we have reports. Do we have anything that we want under
No.
reports?
I just wanted to let everybody know that for September 2nd, we'll have a public hearing on that plan, the district emergency response plan, just so you know, you see that in your agenda. That's something we're required to do.
Okay. Anything else? I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters relating to the employment of a particular person and to discuss pending litigation. Motion made by Mrs. Humes. Second by Mr. Marucci. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Mrs. Humes.
Yes.
Mr. Marucci.
Yes.
Mrs. Bowman.
Yes.
Mrs. Lembeck.
Yes.
Mr. Roll.
Yes.
Mr. Riegel.
Yes.
Mrs. Benedict.
Yes. Okay, we're now in executive session.